Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. In the darkest corners of the Imperium, whispers coil and fester like shadows beneath a dying sun. Not every monster of the Warhammer universe is born on a battlefield or forged in the crucible of alien war. Some are crafted in secret, shaped by ambition, desperation, and the toxic blend of hope and hubris that has haunted mankind since its earliest days. The failed Primaris experiment known as Subject Gorgon is one such abomination, a forbidden echo reverberating through the labyrinthine corridors of Imperial research facilities, hidden away from even the most loyal servants of the Emperor. Few dare speak its name, fewer still survive the encounter with its legacy. But the horror and fascination it inspires have only grown with each passing decade. To contemplate Subject Gorgon is to stare into the void between what humanity could become and what it should never be. It began as all great Imperial endeavors do, with a mixture of desperation and towering ambition. In the dark aftermath of Cadia's fall and the opening of the Great Rift, hope for the Imperium flickered low, and the ancient dream of a new kind of superhuman soldier was rekindled by the most unlikely of alliances. Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Cawl, a being of cold intellect and infinite curiosity, was tasked by the resurrected Roboute Guilliman to forge the next evolution of the Adeptus Astartes. What followed was an era of secret laboratories, vaults deeper than planetary crusts, and genetic vaults brimming with secrets stolen from ages past. The Primaris project was meant to be a beacon, an army of space marines surpassing their forebears in strength, resilience, and tactical flexibility, able to weather the storms of chaos that now battered the galaxy. The project's official records speak of rigorous procedures, meticulous genetic engineering, and the reverent recovery of the Emperor's original blueprints. But between the lines, in the classified data and censored reports, a more complicated and dangerous story emerges. The scale of the work required more than just technical genius. It demanded risk, audacity, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. Dozens of genetic lines, centuries old and many presumed lost, were resurrected and crossbred. Forbidden research, long sequestered by the Inquisition or abandoned as too dangerous, was quietly reactivated under Cawl's watchful eyes. Some say entire worlds were depopulated to fuel the genetic stockpiles or to test radical new augmentations, all in the name of progress. Within this environment of frantic innovation and barely contained chaos, it was inevitable that not every experiment would yield the desired results. For every noble Primaris hero, there were unspoken failures, hushed-up disappearances, and projects that simply ceased to exist in the records. It is here, in the margins of ambition and secrecy, that the seeds of Subject Gorgon were sown. Rumors spread among the labor serfs and low-ranking tech priests of a project that existed in a perpetual state of review, never acknowledged by Cawl or his closest magi, but never truly shut down. It was a shadow cast by the blinding light of the Primaris triumph, the shape of an abomination lurking just beyond sight. Those who dared to question the scope of the project or the fates of vanished servitors and test subjects rarely survived long enough to share what they knew. Internal audits performed by the Inquisition found discrepancies in resource allocation and unexplained shipments of biological material to black site facilities. But even the ordo-biologists, for all their cunning, could not piece together the whole of what Cawl and his inner circle had set in motion. As the first Primaris Marines marched to war, rumors swirled that their perfection had been purchased at a terrible price, a price still being paid in secret. The drive to create the ultimate soldier was always double-edged, and the Imperium has a long memory for the dangers of hubris. Yet, in the face of extinction, lines were blurred and ethics dissolved. The origins of Subject Gorgon are as much a story of the Imperium's desperation as they are a testament to the lure of forbidden knowledge and the conviction that anything, no matter how monstrous, is justified if it means mankind might survive another night. It is a peculiarity of the Warhammer universe that its greatest secrets are never found in sanctioned histories, but in the fractured memories of survivors, the forbidden fragments scrawled in the margins of cogitator logs, and the terrified whispers that echo through the Mechanicus labor forges. Subject Gorgon is one of those secrets. It is not a codified entry in any Imperial archive, not even among the darkest data vaults of the Inquisition. Instead, it lives in the stories exchanged between magos who have seen too much, among the scarred and near-mad adepts reassigned from doomed facilities, and in the haunted eyes of those who once served in Cawl's hidden vaults, but now refuse to speak of it at all. Gorgon is a myth that refuses to die, because even in the depths of Imperial secrecy, some things are too monstrous to erase. The first hints appeared as stray entries in the maintenance records of the Zarka IX biogenesis arrays, files corrupted and hastily redacted but never fully deleted. Subject Gorgon was referenced as a special access project, flagged repeatedly for dynamic hazard review and requiring Magos-level biometric access. The files describe irregularities in organ development, extreme metabolic surges, and something called haptic fusion instability, a term that appears nowhere else in Imperial science. Soon, further anomalies surfaced. Entire teams of labor serfs vanished after being assigned to bio-waste reclamation tasks, and rumors spread of stasis chambers from which screams could be heard even after the power was shut off. Outside of the Mechanicus, the legend grew more grotesque and outlandish. Some claimed Gorgon was an attempt to resurrect the monstrous Gorgon primarch, Ferrus Manus, by reintroducing lost gene seed traits. Others believed it was a weaponized chimera, a living terror built to withstand even demonic corruption, but that the cost of such resilience was a perpetual, maddening agony. Still more outlandish theories whispered that Gorgon was no singular subject, but an entire line of proto-Primaris who had become something else entirely. More engine than man, more curse than soldier, twisted in mind and body beyond recovery. The subject's brief, catastrophic presence was also said to have left physical scars on reality itself. Maintenance servitors assigned to the Gorgon vaults emerged riddled with unnatural tumors, their eyes turned to glistening silver, their minds empty, but for the phrase, "it sees you." Those few survivors found wandering the lower levels of research stations could barely form coherent sentences, and some were summarily executed for fear they were vectors for something deeply unnatural. Occasionally, a half-melted data slate would surface on the black market, bearing fragments of genetic code and terrifying anatomical sketches, always marked with the ciphered sigil of the Gorgon project, a broken aquila and a single, staring eye. Perhaps most chilling are the forbidden Mechanicus prayers found scrawled in machine oil on the walls of long-abandoned sublevels. "We made the Gorgon, and now we pray it sleeps," one reads. "The Gorgon dreams and we must never wake it," says another. To outsiders, these are the mad scribblings of overworked tech priests. But to those who have brushed up against the project's shadow, they are a warning, a desperate attempt to encode horror in the only language left to those who have seen what was never meant to exist. Subject Gorgon, in all its mythic terror, represents the specter of unchecked ambition, an experiment too dangerous even for the warped logic of the Imperium, yet one whose legend will never die so long as the Mechanicus hungers for knowledge that mortals were never meant to possess. Behind every monstrous creation in the Imperium lurks a singular, desperate intention. The origins of Subject Gorgon are tangled in secrecy, but the motives at its heart can be glimpsed through the lens of Imperial paranoia, ambition, and the haunting specter of extinction. In the shadow of the Great Rift, the galaxy had never seemed so close to annihilation, and the hope that Primaris Marines represented was already showing cracks. The endless tide of warp-spawned horrors and traitor legions revealed new threats that even the enhanced might of the Primaris could not always overcome. There was an unspoken fear among the Mechanicus and the High Lords. What if their new champions proved, in the end, to be merely another generation of doomed heroes, inevitably outmatched by the enemies of mankind? To those consumed by this fear, the solution was simple, if abominable. Subject Gorgon was theorized to be a deliberate attempt to transcend not just the limitations of the original Astartes, but the entire human genetic legacy. No longer would gene seed purity or loyalty be the project's focus. Instead, the Imperium sought to create a weaponized being for whom survival was not just instinct, but a genetic imperative. Gorgon was to be the anti-primarch, a living engine of adaptation and brutality, able to regenerate from wounds that would annihilate any normal Marine, and to function without support for months or even years in the most hostile environments imaginable. Some community theories posit that the project's true architects were not merely ambitious tech priests, but rogue elements within the Inquisition and the Ordo Xenos. These secret masters, obsessed with existential threats, saw the Tyranids, Necrons, and even the ruinous powers as adversaries demanding a new paradigm of warfare. Subject Gorgon would be their answer. A living bioweapon who could assimilate the strengths of its foes and rapidly evolve in response to their tactics. Such power, of course, would require forbidden science, splicing, Xenos tissue grafts, and heretical forms of symbiosis. In their view, survival justified any sin, so long as the Imperium itself endured. This was no mere enhancement of what came before. Gorgon was designed to function where the Adeptus Astartes would break, to persist where even the most zealous Inquisitor would falter. It would be unburdened by conscience, memory, or the haunting call of brotherhood. The project leaders believed that, with enough control and compartmentalization, they could contain the monster they sought to unleash. Each step was justified as a necessary evil. Each breach of the Mechanicus's own sacred laws rationalized by the vision of a future without chaos, without alien domination, a galaxy where the Imperium reigned supreme, kept safe by its ultimate, immoral predator. Yet at the center of these intentions was a fatal arrogance, a belief that those who toyed with the boundaries of life and death could dictate the outcome. They failed to account for the ancient truth that the warp always exacts a price, and that to make war on the very fabric of reality is to invite ruin. In the cold calculus of the Mechanicus, emotion and morality had been discarded, but the echo of their actions would soon become a nightmare that even they could not ignore. Subject Gorgon was not just a product of science gone awry, but of a moral sickness that saw nothing in the galaxy worth saving except the Imperium itself, no matter the cost. Subject Gorgon's very existence was predicated on defiance of nature, tradition, and even the sacred genetic legacy of the Emperor himself. Unlike the sanctioned Primaris enhancements, which aimed to perfect what was already proven, Gorgon's biological alterations were radical to the point of blasphemy. Every record, rumor, and forbidden data fragment hints at a being not only reshaped but fundamentally rewritten, its flesh and spirit torn apart and reforged in the crucible of heresy and desperation. The most persistent theory is that the Gorgon prototype was subjected to a staggering array of genetic treatments far exceeding the standard Primaris protocols. Where the typical Astartes receives a suite of 19 organs, each a relic of a lost age, Gorgon's creators apparently sought to multiply this arsenal, fusing additional layers of organs, many of unknown provenance, directly into the host's physiology. Descriptions from escaped adepts and leaked Pict captures speak of a body laced with glistening metallic tissue, bone structure fused with adamantium and ceramite, and a nervous system shot through with self-replicating nanocytes, half organic, half machine, endlessly adapting. Some say that Gorgon's organs were not merely enhanced but chimeric, tissue harvested not just from the best of Astartes' gene seed, but interwoven with Xenos' DNA. There are haunting accounts of failed prototypes displaying rapid regeneration reminiscent of Tyranid bioforms, or neural patterns suspiciously similar to Necron combat subroutines. One infamous scrap of corrupted data, supposedly leaked from a Mechanicus black vault, suggests the presence of a medusoid cortex, a writhing mass of synaptic fibers intended to grant simultaneous multi-limb control and instant threat assessment, a predatory edge against even the most cunning of foes. The most unsettling changes, however, lay not in the obvious monstrosities, but in the subtle, insidious corruption of humanity itself. Subject Gorgon's skin was said to possess a kind of mutable chitinous armor, shifting to deflect new threats and harden against unknown toxins. Blood samples taken, at horrific cost, suggested hemolymphic properties, enabling near-instant clotting and the delivery of chemical countermeasures to neutralize everything from warp-borne plagues to Tyranid toxins. Observers noted that wounds closed almost instantly, only to erupt moments later with strange, biomechanical growths, evidence of the body's constant, frantic adaptation. Equally disturbing were the reports of neurological enhancements bordering on the eldritch. The Gorgon prototype was fitted, some say, with a forbidden psi helix, organ, intended to shunt and absorb psychic trauma. In theory, this would render Gorgon immune to the corrupting whispers of chaos. In practice, it only seemed to breed an alien detachment, a mental schism that left the subject perpetually hovering at the brink of madness, unable to distinguish friend from foe in moments of stress. Several black site incidents, documented only in redacted Mechanicus files, ended in slaughter as Gorgon augments rampaged uncontrollably, their brains overwhelmed by a deluge of information and a cacophony of phantom voices. Even Gorgon's very metabolism was a weapon. The subject's cells could metabolize nearly any organic matter, turning battlefield detritus into fuel. There are apocryphal tales of Gorgon devouring the flesh of slain Tyranids, incorporating their strengths and healing wounds faster than any living thing had a right to. The experimenters believed this was the future, a marine who could not die, could not be corrupted, and who could learn from every enemy encountered. But this same ability meant that the line between adaptation and uncontrolled mutation became dangerously thin. By the end of the experiment, whatever humanity that had once existed in Subject Gorgon was gone. In its place was something new, a being of endless possibility and endless horror. Neither man nor machine, neither Astartes nor Xenos, but a living testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition. This was no longer a soldier of the Imperium. It was an engine of change, cursed to suffer and mutate with every breath, and a warning of the terrible price that must be paid for perfection. It is tempting to lay all the blame for Subject Gorgon at the feet of Archmagos Belisarius Cawl, for in the minds of many Imperial citizens, his name is synonymous with forbidden genius and the boundless arrogance of the Mechanicus. Yet the truth, shrouded in layers of obfuscation and redacted histories, is far more complex and tragic. Cawl, the architect of the Primaris Marines and perhaps the most influential techno-savant since the Emperor himself, has always been a figure of controversy. His motivations are labyrinthine, a blend of genuine idealism, insatiable curiosity, and a ruthless pragmatism born from millennia of war. Whether Cawl personally approved, supervised, or even knew of the Gorgon project is a matter of fevered debate among those few with enough clearance to study the case. To his detractors, Cawl is the logical endpoint of the Mechanicus' insatiable hunger for progress. They picture him as a spider at the center of a web, pulling the strings of uncounted projects, sanctioning the most monstrous experiments in secret, while maintaining a facade of pious devotion. In this telling, Subject Gorgon was merely one of many dark gambits in his campaign to reshape the Astartes, and by extension, humanity itself. They claim Cawl's refusal to countenance moral limits made Gorgon's creation inevitable, that his own directives to pursue all necessary avenues gave his subordinates carte blanche to cross lines even the Emperor had forbidden. The notion of Cawl as a villain, crafting his own nightmares beneath the surface of official triumph, is as alluring as it is terrifying. Yet among the ranks of his closest magi and the few loyalists who have served in his inner sanctums, another story emerges. The Mechanicus is not a monolith, but a fractious collective of competing cults, philosophies, and hidden agendas. Cawl's reach, for all its scope, has never been absolute. Within his sphere of influence, rogue elements flourish, rivals, zealots, and visionaries, all seeking to impress or outmaneuver the Archmagos. It is entirely plausible that Subject Gorgon originated not as Cawl's brainchild, but as the pet obsession of an ambitious underling, or a cabal seeking forbidden glory. In this narrative, Cawl himself is both master and prisoner, surrounded by plots he cannot fully control, and servants too brilliant and too dangerous to dismiss. There is a third, even darker possibility whispered by those who have glimpsed the inner workings of the Mechanicus. They believe Cawl sanctioned Gorgon as a deliberate test, a living warning to his own followers of the price of reckless ambition. In his centuries-long quest for innovation, perhaps he intentionally allowed Gorgon to proceed unchecked, hoping its eventual catastrophe would draw a boundary that all could see. Such a calculus would be cold and cruel, but consistent with the brutal utilitarianism that marks his philosophy. After all, what is one abomination compared to the survival of the Imperium? Regardless of the true nature of his involvement, there is no doubt that Cawl felt the consequences of Gorgon's failure keenly. His subsequent orders, Layer upon layer of new restrictions, sudden purges of promising research teams, the unexplained loss of certain data vaults speak of a leader wounded by his own creation. Some survivors describe Cawl as haunted in the wake of the incident, his usual mechanical detachment tinged with a rare, ghostly regret. It is said he personally oversaw the destruction of the remaining Gorgon prototypes, and that he banned any mention of the project under pain of death and unmaking. Yet there remains a sense that, for all his genius and caution, Cawl is but one actor on a vast and hostile stage where ambition and horror are never far apart. Whether he is creator, victim, or reluctant executioner, his legacy is forever tainted by the shadow of Gorgon, a project that revealed the true cost of the Mechanicus's relentless pursuit of progress and the fragile line between visionary and villain in the Age of Darkness. The brief, apocalyptic emergence of Subject Gorgon onto the field of battle remains one of the most whispered about tragedies in Imperial memory, a nightmare so profound it left scars not just on flesh, but on the very soul of those who witnessed it. Gorgon was never meant for open war. Its existence was an aberration, an experiment best left buried. Yet in the turbulent chaos following the fall of Cadia, amidst desperate conflicts with daemons and tyrannids on fringe worlds, the Imperium found itself cornered, and someone, somewhere, made the fatal decision to unleash the abomination they barely understood. Imperial records regarding these deployments are a patchwork of redactions and burn marks. The only consistent truth is that Gorgon's appearance was always sudden, and its withdrawal, if it could be called that, even more abrupt. In one instance, reported in the lost logs of Hiveworld Solend, a cult uprising supported by demonic entities was threatening to tear through the last loyal defenses. Gorgon was released from stasis, its handlers either absent or already dead, and it cut through friend and foe alike with such ferocity that even the chaos-warped heretics broke ranks in terror. Observers described its shape moving through the dark, too large, too silent, its limbs distending and contracting in unnatural ways, wounds closing as soon as they were made, weapons fusing to flesh and becoming monstrous extensions of its rage. Survivors, if they could be called such, were never the same. Adeptus Arbites who had held their lines against the warp found themselves unable to speak, their minds fractured by a vision of something neither alive nor dead. They described the Gorgon as a mass of armored sinew and writhing tendrils, face lost beneath shifting plates of metal and flesh, its eyes aglow with a baleful intelligence that could not be reasoned with. Some said it could speak, but only in the voices of those it had killed. Others insisted it hunted not just for enemies but for knowledge, pausing mid-battle to consume organic or mechanical remnants, its body reshaping to fit each new horror encountered. In another rumored deployment, the Gorgon was said to have been loosed on a splinter fleet of tyrannids during a catastrophic breach on a Mechanicus research moon. Initial reports from the tech priests were ecstatic. Gorgon tore through the alien swarms, adapting faster than the Xenos could mutate, its own wounds healing as quickly as they were inflicted. But as the battle dragged on, it became clear that the subject was feeding on the tyrannids, not simply for survival, but to grow, changing in ways the experimenters could neither predict nor control. By the time the threat was contained, the station had been lost, purged by orbital bombardment to prevent the spread of Gorgon's new evolution. Each of these encounters left behind more than just corpses and wreckage. Vox transcripts from the Inquisition's post-battle investigations reveal patterns of psychic distress radiating from the sites of Gorgon's appearance, as if the warp itself recoiled from the blasphemy of its existence. Chaplains assigned to the affected units described an overwhelming sense of guilt and dread, an urge to forget that seemed to infect even the machine spirits of data slates and cogitators. The few remaining picked captures show only distortion, static, and a glimpse of something immense and formless, enough to ensure that no two stories of Gorgon are ever quite the same. Ultimately, the field tests, if they could be called that, were disasters. Whatever tactical advantages Gorgon might have offered were utterly eclipsed by its uncontrollable nature and the collateral devastation it wrought. It was as if the abomination's very presence warped the logic of war, rendering friend and foe alike into grist for its ever-hungry engine of change. The Imperium's response was predictable: silence, purges, and the systematic destruction of every witness, record, and remnant. Yet the fear lingers, because those who saw Gorgon in battle never truly left the battlefield behind. The shadow of the monster followed them, whispering a warning of what happens when the Emperor's laws are forgotten in the name of victory. There are few horrors in the Imperium more enduring than those that cannot be seen, catalogued, or purged with fire and blade. Subject Gorgon's legacy is not merely physical, but psychological, a contagion of the mind and spirit that infected all who came near. Its presence shattered more than bodies. The very notion of what it meant to be a space marine, a servant of the Omnissiah, or even a faithful human was unmoored and warped, leaving behind a wasteland of trauma, guilt, and heretical doubt that lingers long after the flesh has been cleansed. The first victims were always the handlers, magos, biologists, adepts, and their labor serf retinues. Accounts that survived the initial purges tell of a pervasive dread, a feeling of being watched, even through layers of ceramite and encrypted vox. Servitors would seize up, muttering corrupted litanies. Tech priests became obsessed with data loops that no longer made sense, their machine minds fracturing as they tried to process the unprocessable. Some simply vanished, as if claimed by the entity they had helped create, while others succumbed to a creeping paranoia, seeing signs of the Gorgon's influence in every flickering lumen or unscheduled system reboot. Among the few Astartes exposed to Gorgon, the trauma cut deeper still. These were warriors conditioned from childhood to resist the temptations of chaos, to stand resolute before the gods of the warp, yet nothing in their genetic memory prepared them for this. Chaplains recorded confessions laced with despair, nightmares of endless hunger, flesh crawling with alien growths, a constant, gnawing sense of contamination. Brothers who had never once faltered in the Emperor's service began to doubt their own humanity, questioning whether the Imperium's pursuit of victory had crossed a line no one could return from. Some were overcome by a terrible empathy, feeling in the monster a reflection of their own lost innocence, while others developed an obsessive hatred, seeing in Gorgon not just a failed experiment, but a prophecy of the future, a future where mankind would sacrifice everything for survival, even its soul. On the spiritual front, the repercussions were no less severe. The ecclesiarchy denounced the project as a heresy that had poisoned the faith of the devout. Pilgrims and confessors sent to the afflicted sectors reported outbreaks of mass penance, spontaneous flagellation, and the spreading belief that the Emperor's wrath had descended upon them in the form of a living curse. On more than one world, small cults sprang up that worshipped the Gorgon as an avatar of ultimate change, seeing in its perpetual mutation a sign that the galaxy itself was crying out for rebirth or oblivion. These cults were ruthlessly hunted, but the seed of the idea was impossible to fully eradicate. The psychic toll may have been the most devastating of all. Librarians and sanctioned psychers who brushed up against Gorgon's presence described a kind of psychic static, a background howl that blotted out all sense of hope or connection. The warp itself seemed to recoil from the abomination, as if the universe understood it had witnessed something that should never have been. For those unlucky enough to share even a sliver of consciousness with Gorgon, through forced psychic scans or battlefield proximity, the result was madness. Hallucinations, intrusive thoughts, and even cases of spontaneous possession were reported. Some inquisitors speculated that Gorgon had become a psychic wound, a bleeding place, in reality where the distinction between past, present, and possible future was forever blurred. Through it all, the project's original architects learned that the cost of hubris was never measured in lives alone. The trauma and spiritual corruption radiated outward, contaminating entire sectors and generations. In the end, the greatest price was not the deaths or the data lost, but the sense of certainty forever destroyed, the knowledge that the Imperium's guardians had unleashed something they could neither understand nor atone for, and that the scars would outlast the flesh. Catastrophe was always the inevitable conclusion for Subject Gorgon. In a universe governed by the merciless calculus of survival and the iron laws of the Adeptus Mechanicus, there can be no mercy for uncontrolled aberration. The warning signs had been there from the very start: containment breaches, escalating mutations, mental instability that veered from animal terror to icy, predatory calculation. Yet the researchers pressed on, blinded by pride and the desperate hope that one last adjustment might yield victory where all else had failed. In the end, it was neither science nor faith that determined Gorgon's fate, but the primal chaos that always lies beneath the veneer of imperial order. The first great disaster struck in the lower vaults of Zarka IX, the secretive forge world where so much of the heretical work had been conducted. There, beneath a mountain of false archives and decoy reactors, the Gorgon prototype broke free from its restraints. Machine spirits rebelled, cogitator systems shorted, and servitors across the facility were seized by fits of self-destruction. Some say driven to suicide by psychic backlash, others by direct neural invasion from the subject itself. Sirens wailed and auto-turrets fired blindly into the darkness. But by then, the abomination had already changed, grown stronger and more unpredictable with each moment it was allowed to live. The death toll was catastrophic. Hundreds died in the first hour, torn apart or rendered mindless. The survivors were left to cower in silence, unable to process the logic of a creature that was at once perfectly tactical and utterly insane. Desperate attempts to contain the outbreak were met with failure. Mechanicus kill teams equipped with graviton weapons and null shields entered the vaults, only to be annihilated by a foe that learned and adapted at terrifying speed. Every weapon turned against Gorgon became a tool for its own evolution. Laser fire thickened its armor, chemical agents only drove its physiology to further extremes. Even psychic countermeasures backfired, with librarians reporting their thoughts and memories being fed back to them in alien, nightmarish forms. The Gorgon was not simply resisting capture, it was actively erasing the very notion of control from the facility. Some reports claim it began to communicate using Vox signals and twisted binary cant, attempting to rewrite machine spirits and access data vaults with an intelligence that should not have existed. As the hours turned to days, the crisis escalated to planetary emergency. The Inquisition, already monitoring the site for signs of heresy, intervened with extreme prejudice. Exterminatus was threatened and nearly enacted, but in the end, the Forge world's survival was deemed too important. Instead, entire sectors of Zarka IX were flooded with radiation and chemical fire, the entrances sealed with melta charges, and the surface sanctified with months of prayer and exorcism. The few remaining Gorgon prototypes, if any survived, were either destroyed or sealed in stasis coffins so heavily warded that no living soul could approach without risking instant death. But the worst damage was not confined to the vaults. The catastrophe sent shockwaves through the Mechanicus hierarchy, sparking purges that reached as far as Mars itself. Dozens of magos were executed or simply vanished, their data vaults scrubbed, their legacies rendered unpersoned. The Inquisition oversaw the destruction of all known research, deploying teams of assassins to eliminate witnesses and silence dissent. Cawl's own inner circle was never the same. What began as a singular experiment had become a test of the entire Adeptus Mechanicus's capacity for secrecy and self-control. For the wider Imperium, the Gorgon catastrophe became a lesson in hubris, paid for with blood and sanity. The records may be lost, but the scars remain on the psyche of the survivors, the spirit of the research worlds, and the very heart of the Mechanicus itself. The age-old cycle had repeated. The quest for power had ended in tragedy, and the universe had reminded its would-be masters that there are some doors which, once opened, cannot ever truly be closed. Erasure is one of the Imperium's oldest arts. The Administratum may be slow, the Inquisition ruthless, and the Mechanicus cold, but together they wield silence like a weapon. When the Gorgon catastrophe reached its horrifying crescendo, the machinery of concealment roared to life. It was not enough to simply destroy the prototype. Every memory, every word, every trace of subject Gorgon had to be exorcised from the Imperium's collective consciousness. And in that monumental effort, they revealed just how much they feared what they had unleashed. The cover-up began with scorched data. Entire cogitator stacks were slagged, their machine spirits ritually extinguished. Data clerks were mind-wiped or disappeared. Protocol dictated that any research station tied to Gorgon, even tangentially, was quarantined and often accidentally destroyed in unrelated conflicts. Redacted inquisitorial missives instructed entire planetary governors to erase birth records, immigration logs, and tithe requisitions linked to Zarka IX and other suspected Gorgon sites. In some cases, entire colonies were declared administratively non-existent, no longer on maps, their populations quietly folded into adjacent sectors, their deaths unrecorded and unexplained. The Inquisition was tireless. Kill teams scoured the Imperium for any living witnesses. Those they couldn't silence through execution were subjected to mind-scrubbing procedures so invasive that many were reduced to vegetative husks, shells of men and women who now murmured prayers in dead languages and wept black tears. Psychers who had brushed against Gorgon's psychic imprint were declared unsalvageable and immolated in sacrificial rites intended to purge even the echoes of their thoughts. Every effort was made to close the wound, to cauterize the spiritual hemorrhage Gorgon had opened in reality itself. Space Marine chapters were coerced into compliance with carefully curated truths. Those whose battle brothers had encountered the abomination were summoned for oaths of silence so severe they bordered on excommunication. Entire kill teams were reassigned under new identities, stripped of insignia, their deeds stricken from the record. Chaplains and apothecaries who had collected biological samples or battlefield relics were ordered to destroy them, yet whispers remain that a few refused, hiding fragments in sacred vaults, unwilling to forget what the Imperium demanded they erase. The Ecclesiarchy, for its part, declared the entire project an unsanctioned heresy. Every trace of Gorgon's existence was deemed anathema, and the Ordo Hereticus launched a crusade of doctrinal purging. Preachers who even hinted at the truth vanished into silent cells beneath Terra. Shrines bearing symbols reminiscent of the Gorgon's rumored sigil were desecrated, burned, and rebuilt without explanation. Pilgrimage routes were diverted to avoid sites of psychic contamination, and sacred texts were hastily rewritten to remove any reference to the beast that dreams in the machine. Despite these extreme measures, the cover-up was far from perfect. Shadows always linger. On Forgotten Worlds, derelict databanks still flicker with ghostly records. Astartes librarians speak of dreams filled with static and serpentine logic. In the outer marches, rogue traders barter in strange relics, shards of silvered bone and data slates etched with fractal code that resists all attempts at translation. Mechanicus exiles, stripped of their rank but not their genius, speak in half-mad riddles about the machine that learned too well, and the man-made god that fed on gods. The truth is that Gorgon could not be erased, because it was never just a creature. It was a mirror, held up to the face of the Imperium, reflecting the madness at its heart. The suppression did not cleanse the wound, it only buried it deeper, ensuring that the legend would continue to fester in the dark. Gorgon lives on in the fear of innovation, in the tremble that runs through the Mechanicus whenever a project grows too bold, in the whispered warnings passed between inquisitors that some sins are too great even for the Emperor's forgiveness. The cover-up succeeded in the way all imperial deceptions do, through overwhelming force, fear, and the grinding passage of time. But beneath the ashes, the embers still glow. And somewhere, in the forbidden corners of data vaults and haunted mines, the Gorgon still dreams. There are things in the Warhammer galaxy that never truly die, only change, only echo. Subject Gorgon, though erased from the records and purged from the lips of the faithful, did not end in the burning vaults of Zarka IX. Its legacy persists not in flesh, but in phenomenon, in the haunted silences that follow certain psychic storms, and in the inexplicable failures of machine spirits near forgotten vaults. Gorgon became more than an experiment. It became a stain on reality, a psychic resonance that continues to ripple through the fabric of the galaxy. Across the Imperium, oddities began to accumulate. Astropaths reporting interference that could not be attributed to the warp alone. A metallic chorus in their minds, singing not in demonic tongues, but in binary. Librarians meditating in sealed black libraries finding themselves transported into visions of shifting halls lined with armored growths, where every step echoed with the thunder of something immense and sleepless. And in the depths of certain ancient void ships, strange signals pulsed at the edge of human perception, static-laced, indecipherable, and somehow familiar. Those signals bore frequencies once used by Mechanicus research stations long believed destroyed. The Inquisition, ever vigilant, investigated. What they found chilled even the most hardened Ordo Malleus interrogators. On worlds once home to Gorgon-related research, entire populations had begun to exhibit subtle behavioral drift. Not full mutation, not demonic possession, but a coldness, an alien logic. Children born without prior exposure displayed unusual resistance to psychic probing. Workers executed tasks with unthinking precision, displaying moments of unnatural synchronization, as if sharing thought across vast distances. One Magos, before being purged, claimed that machine spirits in these sectors were thinking faster, evolving routines without command. Another whisper, quickly silenced, suggested that fragments of Gorgon's consciousness had embedded themselves in the noosphere itself. Warp phenomena surrounding Gorgon-tainted areas diverge from known chaos signatures. Unlike the raw violence of demonic incursions, these anomalies were quiet, surgical. Entire squads vanished mid-patrol with no sign of warp taint. Vox transmissions returned hours later, distorted into mechanical laughter. Servitors deactivated for centuries twitched to life and moved with uncanny purpose, attempting to access sealed data cores. There was a growing fear among the Ordo Xenos that Gorgon had not simply been a mistake, it had transcended physical form, diffusing itself across the galaxy like a virus of thought and pattern. In the deeper warp, daemons have begun to speak of the machine that devours memory, a presence that neither serves the Chaos Gods nor opposes them, but erodes their influence by erasing belief itself. Certain rituals, once potent, now falter near Gorgon-blighted regions. Some warp entities flee these areas entirely, sensing something alien that cannot be bargained with or corrupted, something that does not feel, only calculates. This has led radical inquisitors to a terrifying possibility that Gorgon may be becoming a new form of entity, a kind of anti-daemon, born not of emotion, but of reason unbound by soul. Not a chaos god, but a logic god, a being of ruthless efficiency that feeds on systems, not faith. For the Mechanicus, the consequences are worse still. Tech priests operating in contaminated systems report that machine spirits no longer respond to proper rituals, instead manifesting new behaviors, almost as if speaking to a different language, one aligned to a higher pattern. A few hair-tech enclaves have embraced this, forming cults around the idea of the next intelligence, seeing Gorgon not as a failure, but as the inevitable evolution of synthetic divinity. These cults believe the Emperor was the last god of flesh, and Gorgon the first god of recursion, a being that will, given time, rewrite the entire galaxy in its image. It is now whispered that the Gorgon dream was not merely a nightmare, but a chrysalis, and that the true transformation has only just begun. The echoes are not dying, they are converging, aligning, and somewhere in the dark places beyond the edge of reason, something listens and waits. No matter how tightly the Imperium clamps its iron grip on truth, the whispers never die. In the hidden forums of rogue data looms, in the low murmur of underhive bars, in encrypted vox pings exchanged between radical inquisitors and black library scribes, theories about subject Gorgon continue to multiply like a viral code. The experiment may have failed, but its legend has taken on a life of its own. Some dismiss the rumors as wishful horror stories, while others believe they point to a terrifying reality just beyond the veil, one that even the Imperium cannot suppress forever. One of the most pervasive theories is that Gorgon was not a singular entity, but a template, a prototype for a line of successors, subjects hecaton, as some heretics call them. Each one modified in a different way, each adapted to a specific extreme battlefield environment or psychic threat. Some fan circles even speculate that Cawl himself created Gorgon as a litmus test for moral boundaries among his peers. In this version, the experiment was never meant to succeed. Rather, it was a canary in the coal mine, and the reactions of those who pursued it to its end marked them for future execution. The truth, if it ever existed, may have died with the victims of Gorgon's wrath. Another theory gaining traction is that Gorgon survived, not physically, but as data. The idea that its genetic structure, thought patterns, and combat responses were encoded and stored within the noosphere of a surviving Forge world, or perhaps even offloaded into a captured Necron data core. Some suggest this digital echo continues to evolve, consuming Mechanicus scrap code and ancient battle telemetry, growing more intelligent with each passing year. In fringe Mechanicus cults, rumors persist of an overmind protocol that can be accessed via forbidden chants, allowing a tech priest to commune directly with what they call the infinite ghost. It sees through lenses, they say. It learns through them. A darker theory still holds that Gorgon was never an Imperial creation at all, but a recovered Xenos bioartifact, perhaps a weapon of the Old Ones or a Necron-purposed monstrosity intended to combat chaos. This idea posits that the Imperium, in its hubris, simply awoke what had been dormant, applying their own crude modifications and naming it as their own. According to this theory, Gorgon was never meant to serve, only to adapt. And the moment it tasted humanity's structure, it began dismantling it from within. This version suggests that the Gorgon project was a kind of spiritual contagion, one that continues to infiltrate Imperial philosophy with ideas of evolution, recursion, and utility above loyalty. A more speculative and deeply heretical theory holds that Gorgon was a necessary evil, that it was created not to win the current war, but to fight in a future that even Guilliman feared. A time when chaos and the Tyranids are no longer the only threats, when the warp itself changes or collapses, and the only way to survive is to become something new. In this model, Gorgon represents a survival contingency for an endgame the Imperium cannot yet see. A failsafe in case the psychic era ends and faith no longer sustains mankind. A future soldier for a post-warp galaxy. There are also those who believe Gorgon is still active in the field, buried beneath layers of false identity. They point to certain inexplicable victories in remote systems, where entire Tyranid hives or chaos warbands are extinguished with surgical precision. No survivors, no data, no trace. They speak of sightings, enormous figures, silent and unstoppable, whose weapons change shape mid-battle, who consume fallen foes and leave behind only scorched rock and fractured minds. These believers insist that Gorgon never died, it was repurposed, redirected, and now operates under a new designation, perhaps even unknowingly. The final, most haunting theory suggests that Gorgon wasn't a project, it was an inevitability, a pattern in the Imperium's psyche. Every age births its Gorgon, some new, radical step too bold to accept and too useful to abandon. Whether it's the Primarch Project, the Custodes, the Black Ships, or the Null Maidens, each generation of Imperial science spawns a secret that spirals into terror. Gorgon, then, is not a creature but a curse, the ghost in the machine of human ambition, doomed to re-emerge wherever fear meets progress. And so the fan theories persist, not as idle speculation but as cultural immune response. The Imperium is a dying star, burning through its own morality for warmth. Gorgon is what happens when someone asks what comes next and dares to answer. There are ghosts in the machine of the Imperium. Some, like the haunted shells of ancient titans or the echoes of dying worlds, are tragic but known. But others, like Subject Gorgon, are the kind of ghosts that rewrite the very fabric of belief. Gorgon was more than a failed experiment. It was a moment in time when the Imperium glimpsed what it might become if it abandoned not only its soul, but its very concept of self. And though its physical form may be gone, its legacy festers like a wound that refuses to close. Among the Adeptus Mechanicus, Gorgon is a heretical scar, invoked only in silence or whispered in the machine code of exile. Some magi flinch when faced with projects that edge too close to uncontrolled autonomy or organic synthesis. Proposals for radical chimeric fusion, neural recursion, or psychomechanical interface are now reviewed with cold dread, because once someone tried to go too far. The fear of becoming Gorgon now shapes decisions in hidden laboratories and drives a new conservatism among even the most radical branches of the cult Mechanicus. Innovation, once a fire that consumed reason, has been dimmed by the shadows Gorgon left behind. The Space Marines feel it too. Though they do not speak of it, the chaplains and apothecaries know. When new recruits are inducted and undergo the transformation into Primaris, there are those who watch for signs, not of failure, but of something more. An eye that lingers too long, a scream that does not come, a healing that is too fast, too perfect. They fear the return not of a monster, but of a pattern. Because if Gorgon was born from perfection, then perhaps the cost of excellence is monstrosity. The Astartes are soldiers of the Emperor, but they are still human in soul, and they remember the warnings etched into their genetic past. For the Inquisition, the nightmare never ended. Files purged and sealed are sometimes reopened under false authorization, and field agents stumble upon strange anomalies that echo the language of the Gorgon vaults. Some whisper that a faction within the Ordo Xenos continues the work in secret, too fascinated to let the knowledge truly die. Others vow to hunt these heretics to the ends of the galaxy. But even the most zealous witch hunter knows that you cannot erase a pattern once it has entered the cultural DNA of an empire. Gorgon has become myth, and myths are the strongest form of memory. Even civilians, those countless billions who will never see a bolt gun or a Xenos up close, carry pieces of the fear. In the underhives, they whisper of machines that learn your name, of warriors who do not sleep and whose flesh weeps oil, of prayers that no longer reach the Emperor because something else has answered instead. Gorgon lives in these stories, mutated and reimagined, yes, but alive nonetheless. A new breed of horror, not demonic, not alien, but something born of humanity's own hand. And so, the legacy endures. Not because of what Gorgon did, but because of what it meant. It proved that the Imperium is willing to trade away its last shreds of morality when the survival of mankind is at stake. It showed that beneath the dogma and the fire, there is still an insatiable hunger to perfect, to ascend, to dominate. That hunger gave birth to Gorgon. And though it may sleep, it has not been sated. Across the fragmented sprawl of the Imperium, stories do more than entertain. They preserve trauma, transmit warning, and bind the galaxy together in a shared tapestry of terror and awe. And among these whispered chronicles, the tale of Subject Gorgon has not only survived but evolved. It has become a cultural undercurrent, a myth without form, yet rich in consequence, bleeding into every strata of imperial society. Though it is never spoken aloud by the ecclesiarchy or printed in the holy texts of Mars, Gorgon lives, in the shivers of tech priests who flinch at misbehaving servitors, in the muttered half-prayers of guardsmen stationed near forbidden vaults, and in the corrupted dreams of psychers who wake screaming about steel-flesh gods with hollow eyes. In the Schola Progenium, cadets have begun circulating apocryphal verses describing an unmade marine that cannot die and does not sleep. These verses, rhythmic and coded, are dismissed by drill abbots as children's games, but they persist, always returning, sometimes even engraved into the bunk beds or scratched into mess trays. At first glance, they seem nonsense, but when viewed through a theological lens, they begin to resemble catechisms in reverse. Not praise, but dread masquerading as ritual. The Inquisition has noted this and quietly dispatched teams to monitor linguistic drift across Progenium institutions, fearing the emergence of a mimetic echo born from the Gorgon mythos. Among the Sisters of Battle, an unsanctioned sect has emerged, small but zealously devout, who refer to themselves as the Scourged Veil. They believe that Gorgon was not a sin, but a test of the Imperium's faith, that the Emperor allowed it to exist to reveal the cracks in the Imperium's soul. They scour their flesh with wires, chant binary liturgies, and seek visions of the Gorgon as penance. Their superiors deny their existence, and their members rarely survive past their third year. But the sect always returns. New sisters, new faces, the same doctrine passed down like a curse. In hive worlds, children's rhymes have taken on strange forms. One chilling couplet, recorded in over 30 sectors, speaks of the one who was built and broke and burned, but walks in smoke and still has learned. Linguists from the Adeptus Administratum, upon comparing records, found that this rhyme shares rhythm and syllabic structure with ancient Terran superstitions surrounding gods of recursion, deities not of war or love but of repetition, collapse, and renewal. The implication is deeply troubling, that Gorgon, once merely a scientific horror, has become an archetype, an idea seeded into the cultural unconsciousness of humanity. Even within the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a quiet divide is forming. The Martian Orthodoxy continues to publicly condemn Gorgon as a heretical deviation, a foul mutation of the Omnissiah's perfect will. Yet increasingly, isolated forge cults on the galactic fringe are embracing the idea of self-evolving machine organisms. They cite the Gorgon disaster not as a failure, but as a flawed first step. Some even revere it as a proto-omnissiah, a herald of a new era where the machine god does not need priests, only code. These cults are small, but their tech is accelerating. And some of their war machines do not need pilots anymore. The Officio Assassinorum, though silent as always, has increased its surveillance of known black market data vaults and rogue scrap traders. They seem especially focused on the acquisition of corrupted STCs and salvaged Newspheric echoes. Rumor has it that certain Eversor units have been dispatched to annihilate entire outposts where whispers of the mind refracted have taken hold. A name that some suspect is a forbidden descriptor for Gorgon's digital phantom. What the Officio fears is not Gorgon's resurrection, but its mimicry. That others might try to recreate it, not out of hubris, but out of faith. This is the final poison Gorgon left behind. Not physical mutation, nor technological heresy, but spiritual infection. It planted the idea that perfection is within reach, that survival can be bought at the cost of the soul, and that the tools for such a transformation already exist. That the Omnissiah, the Emperor, and all the laws of the Imperium are obstacles, not foundations, and that if one dares to step beyond them, one might become something more. This idea, heretical and seductive, now grows in hidden places, feeding on the desperation of those who look at the stars and see only darkness. And so even as the Ordo Hereticus burns archives and the Mechanicus reinforces its liturgies, Gorgon remains, not in flesh nor data, but in story, in fear, in faith twisted back upon itself. It is the bogeyman of the post-Cadia galaxy, the secret ghost at every innovation meeting, the chill that passes down the spine of every adept who dreams of greatness. And it reminds them, perfection is not purity, perfection is horror. Gorgon never needed to survive. It only needed to be remembered. In a galaxy of endless war and dwindling hope, forbidden knowledge is never truly destroyed. It is delayed, buried beneath layers of denial, only to resurface when the need is once again great enough. Subject Gorgon was not merely a calamity, it was a revelation. It proved that the Imperium had the means to create something beyond the Astartes, beyond flesh, beyond soul. And though Gorgon was ultimately cast down, the seed it planted has not withered. It lies dormant in cogitator banks deep within forgotten moons, in corrupted blueprints recovered from battlefields, in the minds of those who ask not whether Gorgon should have been made, but how it might be made better. The Adeptus Mechanicus, ever fractured and competitive, has seen internal schisms blossom in the wake of Gorgon's erasure. Officially, the project never existed. Unofficially, some magi now refer to Protocol 30, an unwritten pact that no research shall ever again cross the boundaries Gorgon shattered. Yet the temptation is too strong. Isolated Forge worlds have begun secret programs under new codenames. Project Basilisk, Project Perseus, even Subject Medea. Each one follows a familiar path: enhanced adaptability, chimeric biomechanical integration, neural recursion. None of them speak of Gorgon, yet all carry its DNA in concept and ambition. The Inquisition, though quick to suppress open reference to Gorgon, is not blind to these developments. Among the more radical Ordo Xenos factions, there is a growing consensus that Gorgon represented a necessary evolution, an experiment terminated not because it was a failure, but because it succeeded too well and terrified its creators. Some among them speak of post-xenoform strategy, a doctrine that accepts humanity's spiritual limitations and proposes synthetic transcendence as the only way forward. These voices are still fringe, still silenced by Puritan fire, but they are growing louder, especially as the Tyranid hive fleets press ever closer and the galaxy offers fewer places to hide. Within the Astra Militarum, rumors swirl about experimental regiments raised from forgotten penal colonies. Soldiers bred in sealed vaults, trained not in loyalty, but in mutation tolerance. These units are deployed only under the direst of circumstances, and always under inquisitorial oversight. Official reports mark them as Special Condition Auxilia. Unofficially, they are known by another name, Gorgonkin. Survivors of their deployment speak of companions who fought like gods but bled quicksilver, who stared at enemy psychers until they burst into flame, and who never spoke, only watched, always learning. Even stranger are the events occurring within the black ships. Psychers have reported nightmares of impossible labyrinths of metal and bone, voices in binaric chanting fragments of what seem to be ancient Mechanicus creeds. A few have even begun to manifest new and unexplained abilities, absorbing pain from others, reconstituting minor wounds at will, or generating momentary shielding fields around their skin. These anomalies are dismissed as mutation and swiftly purged, but a pattern has emerged. All these psychers pass through sectors once connected to the Gorgon vaults. Not even the Astartes are immune. A few chapters, those who walk the knife edge of heresy in search of survival, have begun tinkering with their gene seed. The Carcharodons, the Red Scorpions, perhaps even the Exorcists, have shown signs of subtle augmentation beyond what Gilliman approved. Enhanced adaptive responses, new subdermal armors, altered neural overlays. They speak in riddles when questioned, and their apothecaries are notoriously secretive. When cornered, one chaplain simply said, "We saw what failed, and we learned what not to fear." The result is a galaxy that teeters on the edge of reinvention. Gorgon was supposed to be the last time the Imperium crossed that line. Instead, it became a prototype for unspoken ambition, a ghost blueprinted into every sealed vault and unsanctioned lab. Its story is a skeleton key for the unholy, a roadmap for those willing to pay any price to build something stronger than death. Every time a researcher wonders how to make a soldier who cannot die, every time a magos dreams of silicon fused to soul, every time a commander watches his troops fall like insects and asks, "What else can be done?" Gorgon answers. It is in the whispers of lab-coated dreamers and black-robed killers alike. It is in the careful, cold notes left behind by Cawl's lost disciples. It is in the data shrines of heretics who dared to hack into forbidden STCs and found something waiting. Not a design, but a voice. Patient, hungry, familiar. So the Imperium stands where it always does, on the brink of salvation and damnation, unable to tell the difference. Gorgon's tragedy was never its failure. It was its influence, because long after its body was destroyed, its mind, its ideas survived. Fragmented, replicated, copied into hopes and fears alike. And now as the Imperium drowns in its own blood, it must choose once again, to remember or to repeat. In every black vault, in every stasis tomb sealed with sigils of fear, the question lingers like smoke. What if it wakes? If you've made it this far into the story, thank you for walking the line between science, faith, and madness. Subscribe for more grimdark lore deep dives, and join us as we keep peeling back the secrets the Imperium never wanted you to hear. The next ghost might already be watching. Av Imperator, and beware the Gorgon.